Welcome to our little talk about design and developers. My name is Juhani. I always say that don't worry about my last name because it's impossible, but I think yours are worse. I'm the developer part.
Yeah. And hi, welcome. My name is Pierluigi. I'm the designer guy.
So yeah, today this design. So usually I will start this talk asking how many of you are designers in this room.
Whoa.
That's pretty good.
Fun boy.
Good thing you all sit together so you don't have to talk to the developers. That's super smart. So yeah, let me figure out if this works. It works. So we had this kind of idea a long time ago that design and developers are different and everything is bad and they don't talk to each other. And then iOS happened and everything started to look better, and Android happened, everything looked even better. And then people thought like, okay, yeah, this topic is now outdated, everything is just working fine, and we don't have to talk about it anymore. But if you're part of the internet, you always find some interesting things from the internet, and then you kind of start considering if that's still the case. And I talk a lot about things about design and developers. I consider myself like a design cheerleader. I can't do design. If I have to pick colors, I type in hex codes, and they end up being quite horrible. But then I talk to people about this, and people have misunderstood quite badly what is design. I don't ask you to read all of this, but this is one of the comments I had somewhere. I think this back when Google Plus was a thing, about what is design, what is UX. And somebody said they like design, but then it's horrible. They like functional things, but they don't like design. And okay, the problem is design and UX when design gets in the way of functional things. I don't know what that means. Or you have things like completely misunderstood function of Android. We had at this shared element transition, all of these things, and then people said, okay, this is tacky, this doesn't work. And all of these things are like, oh, okay, there's quite a bit thing still to be talked about, especially for developers. So most of us are developers here. Although I kind of assume that everybody else is a developer other than the three boys in the back row. How many of us are developers here? Okay, that's pretty fair. And rest are project managers, right? So then there's a couple of things that my personal life, work life, I work in a lot of companies. Now work as a consultant in a lot of companies, and run into some things that raise red flags immediately. So I gathered some quotes here. When a developer immediately goes, oh, this can't be implemented. That means that the developer is not very flexible of thinking about and figure out if actually can be done. This means I'm too lazy, I can't be bothered. Then there's another way developers go and say, okay, is this signed off? I will not do anything until it's signed off. Same thing a little bit. Is this final? Because I will not be working after I do it once, it's going to be done. And design is never done in one go. This is a real response I got. I went to a company in Germany, and I sat down the first day. So where are the designers? I can talk to the designers. Where are the designers? We have designers in this other city. They make icons when you need. I quit that one day. And then I have one here. And this is a real quote from a designer. Then you understand there's probably something wrong, and it might not work very well. So our idea is trying to figure out how do we get out of this loop. We're going to be blaming a lot of developers because this is a developer conference. Designers do share some blame as well, but you get your share. So this talk is going to be aimed for both parts. There's going to be developer stuff, going to be designer stuff. Don't tune out when the other part is talking. I think it's important to understand how the other part works, so we get like an empathy of working together.
Yep. So yeah, how do we get out of that loop? I think the first thing to accept is that designer and developers are different, think in different ways, maybe have different backgrounds, see the world in different perspective, but there is no, it's not a downside actually, that it's an upside, I believe, because we are building nowadays complex products and we need the full range of perspectives. So it's important that we take in consideration both approaches, and the end results will benefit from that. Of course, we have several examples where just one side approach is taken, and yeah, we have some issues there.
Let's take a look what happens if you only have developers in the team. I hope nobody here wrote this application. It's an example of a thing. So the person who wrote this absolutely knows how to use this. This is a functional application. It's a good, go to Google Play and search for Wi-Fi scanners and you find 15 of these, and they all designed this well. Now, it's good for the person who wrote it, but it's not good for anybody else. This is somebody happened to Hawaii, somebody clicked wrong button and then everybody got a wrong text message, very scary one. Again, design might help in this kind of things. Then we all know this one. USB-C for the win, right? It's horrible. But then, the same applies the other way around. I worked in a design company where developers were involved once design was ready. And then we have horrible things. There's a lot of websites that are dedicated to beautiful designs. You go to this and then they promote their design and go, oh, this is awesome. It looks beautiful, right? But then the developers in the room go like, okay, I got it. There's the central part is highlighted. I can change the highlight. Looks very cool. Anybody here spots a problem immediately? Or you guys are shy? So we, as developers, we look at it. Okay, looks cool. But what happens if this is highlighted? How do you select the text color, for example? So we, as developers, we think about dynamic content. We think about how does it go when different screen sizes and so on. So design is not static screens. And sometimes you have to add a patch on top of any when it's not applied. So yeah,
the goal is actually to merge the two aspects and try to find the solution in between. I like actually this definition of design as problem solving within a set of constraints. And I think this applies very well also for development. What happens is that if the two sides start to pull in different ways, then of course the area of the solution scope is going to be smaller. While if we try to come together and try to understand which are the constraint of each one, then of course the solution it's easier to find. So what problem are we trying to solve? That's the initial question that we are asking ourselves when we start to build a product. And the other question linked to this is what problem are, or which are the people are we trying to solve this problem for? So that's why it's important to start from the user. The user is basically our flagship that we should follow from the very beginning to the end of the project. And having clear in mind which are the user needs help us also to overcome certain personal decision or I don't know, subjective assumption that we often make during the evolution of the project itself. It's important, for example, to know how we are going to understand the user better, and there are some certain methods that exist, UX methods.
This is something. So this is we don't ask us developers to become designers. I think it's important to have split between the disciplines, but we as developers, we have to understand some of the processes, which is really important. I found this book really eye-opening. This is It's an old book, but you can find it somewhere. The idea for mental model, just very shortly, is mental model means the way user thinks about your application. They create a model how things work based on what they look. And if it's conflicts how it actually works, like with the Wi-Fi scanner, they get confused, right? Other concept that I find very endearing, it's in my heart, that's what we use in our company, is creation of personas. This could be a whole talk about personas. We could talk years about personas. Just very quickly, this is a really good concept. So the concept is to create an example of your archetype users. You can never create software for everybody. You have to pick who you're creating your software for, your apps for. And the idea is, let's create a persona, like find a picture of some imaginary person, create a bio, create name, create hobbies, and so on. Now we can start talking about how would this person use our application? Because it's not a real person. We can make fun of the person, we can think the person is stupid, we can think the person is smart, and so on. But we have this, it's a tool we're going to use. So look into it. And then some of the UX principles, we as developers, we should understand. We don't do design, but we should understand some limitations of human mind. We all know we can keep about 7 things in our heads at once. So if menus are bigger than 7, that usually causes problems because you have to start remembering things. And this is very easy to test. You just say random words and you remember about 7. It depends a little bit. But these are kind of important things to know, but not to have to learn by heart. One thing I like to see, it's very difficult, but usability testing is super eye-opening. I had the chance to do in university a course about usability and usability testing. They were smart. They made us build an application. And when you spend a month building something, you think it's awesome. Then you put it in front of a user, and we put it in front of a friend of ours, and we filmed the whole thing, and the friend couldn't even start using it. And it's super eye-opening. You feel like, okay, clearly we do something wrong. If you have a chance to see a usability study, video of usability study, participate usability study of your application, do it. If you don't have the budget, most of us don't have the budget to do it. There's a nice way to do it. You have a gorilla usability testing. What you can do, you take your application, you go to a near coffee place, and you walk to some friendly looking person and say, hey, a friend of mine is building this application. Never say it's yours, because people are nice, and they will say, oh, it's very nice, cool. So a friend of mine is building this application. I don't know what to think about it, but would you mind trying to use it? And then you give some tasks to the user and look at how they use it. And you pay for their coffee, and everybody wins. This is something that happened in Berlin. This is a picture of my hotel room bathroom. I'll explain why I have a picture of my hotel room bathroom. I went in. Hotel rooms are interesting usability studies, because what happens, they always are for new users. We have these patterns that have evolved, doors and so on, right? And light switches is one of the patterns we all understand uniformly. So what happened? I walked in there, I opened the bathroom, say, okay, it's dark. I know how to fix this. I press this button here. Some other light turns on. With this button here, some other light turns on. With this button here, some other light turns on. I know now, it's going to be this one. Nothing happens. Damn it, right? So, I use the bathroom in darkness. Next day. So, usability problems are your problems, right?
So, yeah, and other important points is knowing your domain. So only if you know very well your discipline, you can basically teach it or explain to the other why you did or you took certain decision. It's really important to always be ready to explain why, because sometimes if the designer tells you, okay, that's the way I design it, just go on, implement it. It's definitely your right to ask, okay, but why? Which is the reason behind? Can we check together if this is really what's the user goal is, or reflect a real user need? And it's definitely your right to ask, and everybody should be ready to discuss that assumption together. And the same thing works the other way around.
Yeah, so if we all know our domain, we can discuss about it. And if you don't know, don't try to hide it. You know, the consultant talk is fine with the customer, but your team is not good. So we as developers, we need to know, and this is Android focused as iOS people here. iOS has exactly the same stuff online. We need to know how to build Android user interfaces. We have to know it. Read this document, learn it, do hobby projects, and know exactly how it is. Because when the designer asks you a question, is it, how do I customize a button? Can I put a certain sized image to a button? You have to know, yep, it goes for material design. Let's see if this works. Other amazing source is GitHub, even though it's now owned by Microsoft. It's the, if you search for Android in there, you have like 500,000 projects. So again, you might don't have to know all the 500,000 projects, but you have to know a source of libraries. And if you follow the community, you know what kind of libraries are available, what kind of new libraries pop up. Keep eyes open and figure it out. When your designer asks some strange viewport pager functionality or something like that, you don't go, I can't be done. You go, oh, I'm going to check GitHub first. For designers, they also have design guidelines. Designers should know the platform, especially it's been historically a problem on Android because designers are very iOS focused. If you design for Android, you need to know Android. But there's kind of interesting stuff happening in the Android community and Android tooling. Android Studio now has visual build tools, and we have these new things called constraint layout, which is very technical. So what I don't ask designers and your designers to do, learn Android Studio or learn constraint layout editor or learn constraint layout completely, but play with it. There's now visual tools. You can start to understand how your developers build the tools, how they build their UIs, and this eases the communication problem. In general, this is, I like to say this is the top slide of the talk. If you take this one with you, it's going to be fine. The idea is that we have two disciplines of understanding the same problem. But for us to understand how to build it, we have to come together. So this side here is what developers know. We know what is difficult to implement, assuming we know our domain, so we don't make miscalculations. And here is what designers understand, what is important from the usability point of view. And if you simplify it a lot, then you're going to create a foursquare, saying, okay, well, this is a no-brainer. It's going to be super easy to do, and it's very important. Let's absolutely do this. These two, let's think about what we want to do. And this, let's leave this at 2.0. Or 10, whatever.
And this makes the life much more easier when you have to prioritize tasks, for example. So if you really identify immediately which is the core, then it doesn't mean that you don't have, or you're never going to implement the nice to have, but you're not going to implement it for the MVP, for example. So a little bit of workflow. We try to be not too much strict about workflow. We are not gonna say again or to speak again about agile, but sometimes a little bit of structure helps. And in this case, what I think it's really important is that everyone in the team, designer and developer, should be on board or should be part of the project for the very first moment. You can choose how to do it, if with kickoff meeting or other methods, but it's really important that everybody shares the same responsibility on the project. I found myself several times in initial meetings with developers, product managers. I showed my nice UI, and then the dev started to point out, okay, but how that's gonna work when you have no data, or you have the empty state, or the server connection fails, or you go to landscape, or you have this other constraint. And those were, for example, some corner cases that maybe I didn't think about, but helped me to immediately rethink on an early stage the UI. And this helped then later, so you cut down, for example, implementation costs. I also like to say that usually there is no over-communication. It's always better to tell the same thing twice. rather than misunderstanding, for example. We have to also consider that sometimes we speak different languages. I think once we were chatting, I don't remember, on Slack probably, about CI, and I meant like corporate identity, and then you meant completely, I don't know, it was continuous implementation on something else. And then we found out, okay, we are speaking about two different things, for example. So stakeholder management, this can be a bit tricky sometimes, especially if you work with clients or if your stakeholders are members inside your company. They should be taught somehow about the workflow, about the process, and they also should be involved. Sometimes it's not easy. Maybe they don't have the technical skill to understand each phase of the process. We had some clients, for example, that they had really difficulties to understand what a work in progress is, what a wireframe is. But it's much, much better to go through this phase with them, and they feel much more involved than then throw the final design to them at the very last stage. So the earlier you can iterate, the better, of course. And yeah, of course, sometimes the stakeholders are a little bit too much focused about the business goals, but this is a very important part. So if we bring this part together with the graphic we had before, then we have sort of this, like we try to merge these three aspects in one. Another important thing is actually priorities. Priorities are sometimes not easy to set, but it's also important to try to understand that we cannot do everything at the same time. It's much better to launch a product or to launch an MVP product in a short time than waiting for months before the whole package of features is basically released. So we can also identify usability issues or problems earlier. And we should also be aware that customization costs sometimes. So if we want to have a completely custom app bar or toolbar, doesn't mean that we don't want to do that. We have actually an example later where we did it. But it's probably not mandatory, so we can start to test our product or our app with a default toolbar, and then start to implement the nice to have later, for example. And then, of course, we always have to try to keep this level of interaction during the whole process. So it's important that we consider design, of course, it's not a linear way. There is a lot of exploration involved. So also developers should try to support this exploration. We implement a lot of prototypes together. So for example, this is a good way to spot immediately or to give in the hands of the stakeholders or the manager of the user, primarily the product, and see if this works. And yeah, a little bit how we work basically is that there are, of course, different phases, but it doesn't mean that the first part should be the designer and then there is a handover waterfall to the developers and that's it. So we always try to somehow to work in parallel. So there is, of course, an exploration phase, a research phase, but also during this part, on technical side, there can be, for example, feasibility studies, or we can start to structure the data and so on. So the more we go through the pixel perfect UI, then of course the more the iterations start to get closer and closer. And of course, once we build something, we always should try to get this loop of testing, iterating again, building again, testing and iterating.
I personally believe that it's directly relational how many iterations you get through the quality of the product. So if you find a way to iterate fast, then you get better product. There's no way around it.
Yep. So tools, I have a little overview about tools I use for design. Sketch is the tool I use mostly for the UI. Now, let's say in the last couple of years, several tools came out, very, very powerful. There is Figma, Framer X released this year. You have InVision Studio, so I don't speak anymore about Photoshop. Maybe still still used, but not that much. And also Adobe switched to XD now for UI. And so basically, Sketch, I used it mostly for creating the UI, and Zeppelin for handing over the measurement, using also as commenting tool now. I don't know how many of you have heard or used at least Zeppelin. Quite a lot already. Okay, so I'm gonna go quickly through this. So that's an overview of Sketch, for example. The good thing of Sketch is that it has several plugins. For example, this is a material design plugin. It has several components that you can pull from. And you can basically quickly customize them and inserting them in your UI. This is for Android, of course. What happens is that you can create those components. After you create them, you can basically change them. This is an example, I think, where you can insert in different icons. And then once you have, for example, your components, there is a symbol library. Figma is, for example, it's not called symbols. They're not called symbols, but they are called components. But they work basically the same way. So you start to create your sort of design system, meaning that once you have your symbol in place, you can save it to your library or to your symbol page, which can be also converted into a library. And once you have this set of symbols, you can reuse them for your different design screens. This is really important because it helps consistency across the screens. And each symbol has different parts. For example, on the left side, you have the assets that are going to be exported to Zeppelin, and the different styles. So if I set some text styles, they are also saved and then can be exported as well. Of course, each symbol is editable. So if I drop this symbol in other screens, I can change, for example, icons. I can change the copy. The icons, by the way, it's another symbol, so you can also have nested symbol. And you can tweak, for example, the way how it's going to be, how it can be adapted to different layouts. So yeah, this is a quick example. If you set some sort of constraint, this is the Sketch adaptive layout. You can see how it's going to change when you change the size or the resolution of your device. So once your screen is done, you export it to Zeppelin. And this is the information that is going to be available. So you are going to have the possibility to basically take directly the assets or to check the text styles. Something we have used also a lot with customer is to have comments in place. This is a quite powerful feature because you can check exactly, okay, this is the thing I want to ask about, I would like to change this, and so on. And you can have also a version history. Yeah, that's the style guide. It's a little bit an old screenshot. Now you have also a component library, but that's how it looks like when you have your style set and export it to Zeppelin. And then, of course, you can also integrate it in other chat tools, like, for example, Slack. In this case, so you can see immediately when a screen is updated and somebody commented it. So
right.
yeah.
Let's I think it's best to show us an example. These tools, well, why we show these tools, we don't get paid by these guys, and these are not the only tools that can be used. I currently work in a German car company that doesn't allow anything to go outside their firewall, which means a Zeppelin cannot be used. And you realize how powerful the tool is when it's taken away from you. So I feel like I work hands-bound. So use the tools you find the best, and find good tools for your organization. Don't take these as the well. So let's show how we did one application together. This is in Snap we have this idea that we want to build some internal application because customers are painful, so we do our own stuff. But we just haven't figured out how to make money out of them. Anyways, so we all of our partners, we get the turn to pitch an idea and what we do, and we adapted this kind of user-centered approach. So what we do, this is I did. I took Google Docs and I wrote personas. Who is this thing for? When you take this kind of user-centered approach for your pitch or your explanation of your idea to business partners or who else we're going to build the app together with, your friends, community, whoever, you take out all of the kind of the detailed design for it. You just explain the idea without designing it. And that's usually very powerful because you don't tie the hands of the designer or your team yet. So I explain, and some of them might notice this might be for me. Usually one of the personas is me, because I want to build it for me. But it's also important we explained who is not for not. So we're building a step counting application that is social aspects, and we didn't want to involve the super strong and sporty guys who already kind of, they don't need the application. So you explain who is it for, who is it not for. So you see this kind of prioritizing method here. 3 boxes is important and source less. So you don't have to take a lot of time to do this. But then you write goals, and goal is a way to describing something that the user does with your application without describing any functions. So it's important to take the functions out of it and describe anything outside your application. And once you write a list of goals, prioritized goals, you can explain with about 10 goals to your friends what you're about to do. And then they're going to go, this is stupid, or they're going to go, this sounds good. And at that point, you spend maybe half a day, and it's a good thing. And then we started doing next step.
Yep. So what we did actually is that we met together. We came together to the same place. We organized a little workshop. I think it was a weekend, 2-3 days maximum, and we started to draft the structure of how our application would be. And immediately there started to pop up several solutions, several possibilities. So we tried to first prioritize which was the core of the app that we would build as an MVP. So I started to draft some wireframe designs, try several solutions for the main chart of the step counter on the top, and then the friend steps just below. So while I was doing this, basically, Juhani wasn't just looking at the sky, but he was
this was
trying
the first
something
prototype
already.
of the application, and this is the level you need to do.
So that was, at that point, we said, okay, it's feasible. We can connect, at least extract the steps. So from those different variations, we decided we took one direction basically, because the multi-chart option had some problem of scalabilities and some other little issues. So basically we took this one and we said, okay, let's prototype that one. And that's what we did. So this was, I think, the
result of the weekend. So we went from the user goals to this phase over the weekend, and it's not something you put in the Play Store, but the goal for this one was it's something with explanation and I can give it to somebody I know. So I can go to my wife and explain, okay, this is what we're trying to do. This is the application. It looks like crap, but don't worry about it. This is how it works, and do some of those things.
Yeah. So we tried to iterate a little bit about that. So we had, after a couple of days, an additional version, a little bit more like improved. And this is actually the version that we sent out to friends to test out.
This is when we started sending without explanation. So there's kind of two stages in my opinion prototype. One of them is you need to sit next to somebody and explain what the buttons do because you haven't done the design yet properly. And next phase is trying to give it to people without having to explain anything else more than that this is what the application is supposed to do.
So yeah, the first feedback we got is that we had this function in which tapping on the main chart, it would switch between the total steps and the percentage of your goal. People didn't understand that, so okay, that was the first feature to be sunsetted.
Yeah, so this is something that took like 3 weeks or 2 weeks until we end the point where we had 5 users. Right? 5 users is enough for they'd run in, and they couldn't figure out one of the features. So then we sat down and was like, do we need it? So like then we actually read through the goal chart again of what we did. And like, that's actually not part of any of the goals we wanted to do. So let's just throw it out. The code is still there, so it's just commented out.
Yeah. So at this point, basically, I was in Berlin, so we kept iterating. We were using at that time Google Docs to share and comment features and have a little bit of a roadmap and so on.
Google Docs is actually alright tool for, like, I like Zeppelin a lot. We use Zeppelin for commenting of UI. But Google Docs was good for evolving discussions of things, like big things. Like,
we had a lot of
do we need this screen at all? Do we need, because we were involved, 3 people involved, iOS developer, me, and designer, and we were all talking all the time.
So yeah, after this other phase, we brought some styling or some brand colors and so on into the app, and we added this little history down there. So what we did is, okay, let's go for another round of tests. This was a bit broader, I think, a bit more, and what we saw is that, yeah, user didn't understand also that, or there were issues. We had like too many percentage and circles.
But this is the thing is about building this stuff on Android. I believe personally that Android is the world's most powerful prototyping platform. If you're an iOS developer, it's iOS, obviously. There's not big difference between the build speed of the platforms. When you build the prototype and you put it in front of the users, you get much, much more valuable feedback. For me, building this thing here, it took me an evening. But trying to describe it in some kind of documentation or doing something else to figure out how this is, it would take much longer. And because we have a good interaction between each other, we don't have to write a specification for each feature. We go, hey, how about if it would work this way? Then I sit down and I build it, and we can throw it in front. And it's much easier to say no to something that doesn't work for real.
So yeah, we had another iteration. We changed the weekly history with this other graphic. So basically, that was the first design
Sometimes
proposals.
Charting is very hard.
And then was the first implementation, actually.
Yeah.
But it worked at the end. So after this part, we kind of managed to get enough feedback to prove the concept. And it was after this, basically, we started to bring some polish to the app. So this was already what we defined as nice to have. So for example, have some user guidance, have some tooltips to explain the user, okay, you reached your goal, or add these friends and so on. And a little bit of animations, let's say, and transitions to smooth the experience. And the very last part was actually, we started to, we said, okay, what if we could do something with the toolbar? So what we did is basically to create this custom toolbar, which reacts on scroll, expand on scroll, and then it shows you basically the hour of the day in which you are. So this was super fun. It was nice. But of course, that was done once the core was already shipped.
It's important to get to the fun part once everything else works. But when you have a good designer working together with you, the kind of the nice to haves and the UI polish are extremely fun to do. Like I was sitting through all night doing this because I found it super fun. I did this beside my work. But I also wrote an article about it. It's now already a bit old, and if I did it again, I probably would go for motion layout. That was before motion layout was announced. Here's a URL. It's called androiduipatterns.com, which goes to my Medium blog. We code the snippets and all of this stuff, so you can just copy most of it. You can't copy the whole project, so you have to think a little bit how it works. But this is kind of the ideas how to do things. So we're basically ending to this. We thought we were going to show this an example just to make a point. This is not a commercial application. It's available in Play Store and App Store. If you search for Social Steps, it's free and ad-free on both platforms. So we didn't come here to sell an application to you. So feel free to give it a go and try. We won't make any money out of you. And we not steal your data, I think. That's it. There's a couple of points we want you to take away from this whole thing. So we went through explaining why we should care with a couple of techniques. I hope you got a good understanding how designers work, from looking at how Pierre works with Sketch and all of these things. But the important thing, keep the user in mind. There's a lot of developers who tend to focus on the technical side. One common answer I get on Twitter or Google Plus back in the days was whenever there's a discussion about the feature, and then the answer from average developer is, let's just make it a user option. And then you're already gone wrong. You should know better how your application should be used and let the user to configure your application. Some user options are fine and so on, but that shouldn't be your default answer. So to keep the user in mind. Step in early. That means both sides. There's companies who don't have designers, like the Icon sketching company, and then there's companies, that design companies, who are developers. If either side works in vacuum from the beginning, you're going to be in trouble. Workflow. Find your workflow. We describe our workflow. Our workflow basically is to talk a lot and go through a lot of iterations. Find what suits you. Find the tools. Find all of those things that suits your company and your organization or your group of friends or whatever.
I think that should be choose the tools right, so not choose the right tools. But there is no tool that has to be used just because everyone else is using it. So I think nowadays we are pretty lucky because we have different options. It's always good to try them out and see if they fit your workflow or your use case.
Yeah, but the main point of today is have respect and empathy to the other part. I do not think we have to have a fight between designers and developers. We are trying to build product together. We are not trying to fight each other. The designers don't change the designs because they're assholes. They change it because it needs to be changed. Developers don't say that something takes a long time to build because they're lazy. It's because it takes a long time to build. So have respect and work together. I think that's all we had today. Yep. Do we have Q&A? We can have Q&A. Sure. You have to come here, otherwise these people don't hear.
Or shout.
Turn on the microphones.
Because this is just for recording. That's an easy question. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Never build a product from a prototype. Always like scratch the prototype and build everything build everything correctly. So at which point you recommend to throw out the prototype, if ever?
I don't throw out the prototype. Like, it depends a little bit how you build it. Of course, there's different types of prototypes, right? There's the one-day prototype you just want to do like a proof of concept. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. But I feel, especially Android, I know, are you an Android developer? Especially in Android nowadays, when you have all the tools that allow, like view models, live data, all of these things, you can use as a prototype. You don't have to hack anymore. So in that case, if you throw in Firebase is so fast to throw in that you don't have to make a fake data layer anymore. It's up to you. I don't throw out prototypes. I try to build from prototypes all the way. So, but I'm probably going to be wrong in some places. Anyone else? Okay, I think we're done. Come talk to us after. We're going to be here an hour or so, at least.
Thank you.